Welcome back. Today I'm trying something new. I'm going to give I guess what you would call a book review. I just finished The Amateur's Mind by international master Jeremy Silman. The subtitle is Turning Chess Misconceptions into Chess Mastery. The idea of the book, which he explains in the preface, is that he would play through master games or even some of his students' games with his students and stop them at certain points and have them write down, or just tell him what, so he could write down their ideas about the position and what they thought the best move was, if they're playing white, what they thought white's plan should be, whether they should attack on the king side and go for mate, whether they should try to penetrate on the queen side and win material. Taking their thoughts, many of which he calls misconceptions, and then trying to turn those into, or force those into better chess ideas, I guess. That part I found very informative, although many of the students that he's quoting in the book turn out to not be what I would call an amateur. Their ideas sounded very advanced to me. But throughout, Mr. Silman spends a lot of time explaining basic chess ideas. I have the book here. I'm going to look at it real quick. One of the things that he talks about is the imbalances, how to look at a position and determine what are the imbalances in the position. One of the ones that we all know that we learn from very beginning is the material. Who's lost a queen versus two rooks, or, knight versus bishop, these kind of things. We learn to add up the points. But others are, the difference between the minor pieces. Do you have a bishop and a knight? Do you have both bishops? Do you have just the knights? What your pawn structure looks like. And this is from this book is where I learned what doubled pawns, isolated pawns, backward pawns, passed pawns meant. I learned about space, whereas before I know I feel cramped in this position, or I know I'm pushing forward, but I didn't know, all the ins and outs of space, taking space in the position, and when you've taken too much, or when to push it, when to protect it. Files and squares, how to determine which ones, are weak. Development. A lead in development was something I had never thought about before. Sometimes you can gain what they call a tempo. I hadn't really thought about that. I haven't never had a chess coach. But anyway, it explains, very clearly in many cases how it can just change the entire game if you can get your pieces developed to optimal squares while the opponent has to constantly react to you. Which brings up the final imbalance is the initiative. Who is forcing the issues? Which player is making moves that the other player has to respond to? And also how to take the initiative back if you don't have it. If the other player is the one with the initiative, sometimes not only you can make one move that not only stops their plan, but forces them to react. And suddenly you have the initiative. And there are plenty of diagrams in the book from real games, like so. Where the move orders are listed, and at the end of each section, at the end of each chapter, there will be tips. Like one, at my level, you don't think about this much, but always expect the opponent to see your threats. We make the one move threats and thinking, they probably won't see this, but of course they do. And so anyway, it was very helpful, although I found much of it above my level, but as I read, I felt like I was gaining more and more. And probably, if I go back and look at the book in 6 months or a year, a lot more of it will make sense to me. What was the thing I was going to say next? One problem that I had was how often I felt like several times he would disparage computers, chess computers. The book was written or published in 1999, so chess computers hadn't come very far by then. There was, I think, IBM had a big computer that played against then world champion Garry Kasparov and was doing very well, but that was one computer playing one guy. We didn't have them on every website and your own computer at that time. So it was a little understandable that he didn't like the way computers were teaching kids to play chess, or that, don't depend on computers, this kind of thing. But I think it was a little short-sighted to not expect them to get better. It reminded me a little bit of the people who back in the 1800s or early 1900s would think that automobiles would never take off and be a reliable way to transport humans back and forth across the country. They just couldn't see that technology would continue to improve. And that's the way I felt about him with computers. Speaking of computers, about halfway through the book, I realized I could check some of these moves with Stockfish. Maybe I shouldn't have, because I was trying to learn general principles, but I did. I thought, I wonder what Stockfish says about this. And a few times I found that it said basically the opposite of what he was saying. I want to read one more passage quickly here. I think I remember the page number it was on. 279 is what I'm looking for. There we go. He says here that in this game between Alekhine and Marcoxi, back in 1923, this move G5 in this game was a mistake. And Alekhine called it inexplicable at the time. And so Silman says, the experienced master knows that this type of wing attack will always fail if something, something, something. White can do this. And then he says, so why did an experienced grandmaster like Marcosi make such a mistake? To answer that, we would have to know what he drank before the game. Demonic possession is another theory. He actually says that right there. Okay. So this was one of the moves that I put into the engine. I put the whole position move by move into Stockfish 14 just to see, how bad of a mistake was it really? And when I got to that position, the move before G5, I would let the engine run, and then I click the little plus button, which tells the engine, check more lines, go deeper. G5 was the best move. Now, I don't know for sure, but I'm fairly certain, I've been convinced that Stockfish, rated, at its highest level, can defeat Mr. Silman in 99 out of 100 games of chess. So after that, I started checking more positions. And I think it had him wrong, say 1 out of every 4 times, 1 out of every 5. Or if not, maybe not wrong, but the move wasn't as bad as he said. Or in cases where he says the best move is this, Stockfish actually found a better move. Most of the time, it agreed with him. I mean, clearly he knows his stuff and I don't. But anyway, that was one problem that modern users might have with this book. But if you, like me, are trying to learn chess ideas and principles and get better, I definitely recommend the book. Like I said, I learned a lot about bad bishops versus good bishops. I learned about backward pawns and why they're not always bad. Certain times they can be good, and he explains why. He explains in what kind of end games that you're entering into. You might want a knight or 2 knights versus bishops, or you might want one of each. Obviously, other positions you would want both bishops, and it wasn't obvious to me before I read the book, but now it's becoming more obvious. I learned some basic principles like rooks belong on open files, certainly earlier in the game. Later in the game, rooks belong behind passed pawns. I learned that rooks going on the 7th rank when they're both can get down there is very powerful. And I definitely saw my rating, at least in daily games, increasing as I read the book. And I certainly saw, too, my positional understanding of the game increasing. Lots of things in the book I still don't understand, but I think if I come back to it in 6 months or a year, I will see that, yeah, now I know what he's talking about. So anyway, if this video gets any good reactions, I may do another one. I am continuing to read chess books. So thank you for watching, and I'll return to my regularly scheduled programming very soon.